Hello and welcome again to another edition of NCI Live. I'm your host, David Groth, a TSS here at Network Center based in Fargo, North Dakota. Joining me today is Mike Pagan, who is a Senior Solutions Architect here at Network Center. And today our topic is going to be VMware by Broadcom. So, Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. How you doing?
I'm doing excellent. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, if you've never seen an NCI Live before, this is actually a live broadcast, and we're going to be talking about this topic. And if you have any questions and you're watching us via either YouTube or LinkedIn Live, you can go ahead and chat us a question, and we will do our best to answer them live here while we're broadcasting. So with that, let's get right into it. So Mike, lots of changes in the VMware and the virtual landscape in Broadcom. Huh?
Yeah, it's been a bit of an adventure, to say the least. There's been some community feedback. I can tell you if you've ever been out and read it, some people are talking about it. And
I'm
it's kind of been
sensing an underlying tone here, Mike.
Oh yeah, people are really upset about the licensing changes, and for some have some very good reasons. Some didn't wait long enough to see the pricing changes. And that's kind of why we also didn't do this right away, because the pricing took a while to show up and it's already changed a little bit. So ultimately we thought it'd be a good idea to, now that it's had a chance to stabilize, to talk about it and put this out there, and so you can start planning ahead for your next renewal, I guess, for your purchases. So,
I do know that they took their own sweet time communicating to anyone what their intentions were once the buyout happened and all of that. But I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you go through it. Why don't you take us through it? Tell us what happened, what's going on, the ins and outs.
Sure. And created some quick slides. We don't take very long on it, and then we can kind of talk about it. So Broadcom acquired VMware. It's finalized in November of last year. VMware has simplified licensing offerings, as in it removed licensing like Enterprise Plus. It changed, it removed like VMware on AWS, and they made it some pretty significant change to the vCloud Foundation and some other pieces that majority of customers don't have. It's more of a service offering, a service provider thing. Some of the changes that affected us as in the small business range is the licensing types, which we'll get into in a little bit here. So the big thing is you can no longer purchase VMware from a perpetual model, like put down, buy your license for, and then have software and subscription for 1 or 3 year term. That model has gone away. It has gone to the subscription model, same as everything, Netflix and all of the other services. So that was one of the things that everybody was kind of trying to figure out what to do. And they changed how licensing happens. It's more of the Microsoft model where your license cores instead of sockets. So that kind of changes things depending on how your systems are set up also. So real quick, Essentials Plus, which a majority of our users have, because it covers 3 hosts and gets you a copy of vCenter and 2 processors per system. That model has changed. It still covers 3 hosts. You still get vCenter, but it covers 96 cores of processors, physical cores in your system. No more, no less. And those are the costs there at this time. They could always change. VMware's conference is coming up in a month or so, and they could flip this on its head. And who knows? We'll find out
So,
then.
so to interrupt you for a second there, Mike, if I'm understanding all of this correctly, one of the biggest changes here is that it's going from a perpetual license to a subscription model. Yeah,
Correct.
that
Yep.
is one of the key takeaways here is that it's now a subscription model. Yep.
Correct. So before you could purchase your Essentials Plus licensing bundle at X amount, and then from then on, just as long as you had your software and subscription at that whatever cost it was, you could continue to renew it forever. That is over. Now these are the costs to replace your existing perpetual licensing from year to year, which is why we want to start taking a look at it now, so you can make plans, because if you're expecting your renewal to be up in December, there is no renewal. You have to decide what model you're going to step into. And then the big thing about the Essentials Plus is it's 96 cores. If you're using 8 cores, doesn't matter. You're paying the full boat. The big difference between that and standard is it's $50 per core in a system, or $142 per core for a 3-year subscription. It includes vCenter Standard. Don't fully know yet how many instances it includes, but you can no longer does not look like you can purchase it separately anymore. Put it that way. And so, and the price for vSphere Standard 1-year core has already changed. It changed in July, so that's why all of this is still in flux. Broadcom is actively listening to feedback from the community, let's say, and hopefully figuring out what the customers will bear to some point. So those are the brief situations. Next, I wanted to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, because I'm of a certain age. I remember spaghetti westerns. I try to find a spaghetti western theme for
Yep.
but it was against marketing guidelines, so I wasn't allowed to do that. So this is what we got. vCenter is included with standard licensing, which is good, because before, if you happen to have one of their acceleration bundles and you needed 4 hosts, so you couldn't qualify for Essentials Plus, you needed to buy 4 hosts of licensing and buy vCenter. That is no longer a thing. So that cost goes away. And vCenter standard is kind of efficient depending on your system, because if we saw on the previous slide, there's a fixed cost for Essentials Plus. If you take that fixed cost divided by $50 a core, as long as you're under 68 cores, standard can be cheaper. Now, talk about that. That is typically single processor hosts, dual processor hosts. I'll mention it again, but you have to, every physical processor in a system is a minimum of 16 cores. So similar to the Microsoft licensing, where each host you have to license a minimum of 16 cores, but Microsoft doesn't care if it's 2 8-core processors or 1 16. VMware, if you have 2 8-core processors, you're paying for 32 cores of licensing.
Right.
Not great. So where this licensing model might be good for some customers is if you have a production site and a DR site, and you're using Essentials Plus in both. Well, we saw the cost for that earlier. Take that times 2. That's what your new cost would be. But if you have essentially, say you had 5 hosts, 3 in production and 2 in DR, depending on your breakout of cores and processors, it may be cheaper to do standard in that case than continue with Essentials Plus.
Yep.
Same as Essentials Plus and Essentials, which was a very common thing that we did, because you need a licensed copy of VMware to access APIs to do things like Veeam replication and things like that. Essentials was a very inexpensive bundle, and it got you 3 hosts and a vCenter copy for remote location. So many customers, we went with Essentials Plus and Essentials. We'll talk about that in the Essentials version, because if you've noticed, I didn't mention anything about Essentials before, but we'll get to that. Same situation. If you it may be possible to have less licensing cost if you switch to standard. And standard can be used in both production and DR sites, or like another place this would be good is I was talking to a customer the other day, and they wanted to add a fourth host to their environment, to their production site. Well, if in the previous last year, you would have basically repurchased your VMware to buy vCenter and buy 4 hosts worth of licensing because there was no real upgrade path. Now, whenever your renewal time is, or your perpetual license expires, you can just hop on the standard licensing and go forward with that. So that it's a little more simpler, a little bit easier to do those types of things. Now, where it's kind of bad, let's say it's bad. You must license a minimum of 16 VMware cores per processor. So, like my example, if you have a single 16-core processor, you license 16 cores. If you have one 10-core processor, you license 16 cores. So it is you are spending money that you're not getting all your benefits for. And if you look at many systems, depending how old they are, would have 2 8-core processors to get to 16 cores. But now you're licensing 32 cores of VMware licensing. And that's obviously twice as much. So in some DR environments, it is likely, because that's usually older equipment, you usually don't put new equipment in DR locations, it may be cheaper, well, it will be cheaper. It may be a real plan to take a processor out of a system so you don't have to pay twice the licensing, depending on where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not worth buying a different processor and putting it in, but those types of things will be part of the calculation. Inefficient licensing costs, like I said, if you had 3 hosts with 16 core processors a piece, that's only 48 cores. If you have Essentials Plus, you're paying for 96. And so your first thought is like, well, let me just put another processor in so I can get all the use of my VMware licensing. Well, then that skews your Microsoft licensing, and you basically have to double your purchase of Microsoft licensing. So that's not great. And dual processor hosts.
You're fighting a battle, it sounds like, between balancing.
Yeah.
You've got to take jumps on one side, but they don't always match up with the jumps on the other side in terms of licensing your hosts as well as your OSs.
Correct. Yeah. There's, I wouldn't even say it's math. It's getting close to calculus when it comes to sorting out these 2 different licensing themes, because it's by core, but they didn't do the same thing. Like they didn't huddle up and go, hey, this would just be easier for everyone purchasing if we just did it the same. Then, nah, we're just going to do it a different way. So we can help sort that out, help you work through some of this math. And another bad thing, not necessarily related to licensing, is there's Broadcom closed all ordering and the old VMware support portal for almost a month. And the result is not fully featured, let's say. So just trying to get into the Broadcom support portal, it takes a while to get your MFA key so you can log in. There's problems with getting other people access to your license entitlement, which means you can't download the software. So sometimes you have to track down the original person who would have got the license email sent to them so you can find your keys. Sometimes there's issues upgrading and downgrading license keys. I've seen that expired licenses that had no longer had software and subscription were just removed and not migrated. I was looking for an old, a friend of mine needed an older VMware utility. That's not out there anymore. So the big thing is, can you get the software and getting the license keys? I suspect if you call support, they will help you through that, but there has been some bumps in the road we've seen with customers getting access to the support portal. So that's not great either.
Yeah.
And the ugly.
My guess is with those support issues, that's just compounding a problem because if they're having issues with their portal, more people are calling in, which is going to tie up their lines even more.
Yep. I'm certain they're quite busy at this point. So like the ugly part of this is if you have a vSphere Essentials, not Essentials Plus, Essentials, it was about $800 bundle to purchase initially, and you got 3 hosts. You didn't get things like vMotion, but you did get a vCenter, so it's great for like DR environments. It is discontinued, it does not exist, and there is no replacement. So you must choose those hosts replacing that licensing with Standard or Enterprise Plus, which we talked about earlier. So there's math there to sort that out. There's also no more free VMware hypervisor. So if you had a host that was running the free version and just for labs, or that's what you're running in production because that's what you could afford, and you were doing like in-gas backups and you weren't doing things like Veeam, hypervisor backups, that doesn't exist. You can't find it. You can't get keys. Hold on to your keys because you won't find it again. So what do you do when it comes to some of these situations? There are many on social media. Their initial reaction is, I am done with VMware. I'm going to take my global corporation and I'm going to move it to Proxmox. And that was a knee-jerk reaction that I don't think anybody is actually going to do. I think now that cooler heads, people have a chance to cool off and look at the models. Some people are legitimately with these licensing changes, especially with the core licensing, because it was per socket before. So if you happen to put in like 24 core sockets, processors in your host, you now have a pretty heavy licensing burden. That is unfortunate. Those organizations do have a legit case to take a look at different licensing models. On the smaller end, most of the servers that we have sold just over the years have been like 8 core, 10 core, 12, now 16. We kind of standardize on 16 core systems because that's the minimum amount of licensing for Windows or for Microsoft. So most systems have 16 cores. You can get a lot of production out of a 16 core system. So that'll be pretty common. Like a 20 core, 24 core, that has a more of a special use case, higher density, VDI, things like that. Those things you'll end up paying more, but there always is an opportunity. There's a newly hungry and invigorated competitive market for other hypervisors. Hyper-V on a DR environment at a single host. It's very good. It works surprisingly well. Everybody has downed it for years, but it works okay. It does what it's supposed to do. Nutanix is another big name hypervisor. They have per core licensing also, basically on a subscription model. So I think some of that is eyes wide open. You're changing one type for another type, but that they definitely have their advantages. And there's newer hypervisors out there. There's a newer one called Verge.io that we've done some looking at. Scale Computing is another one. Proxmox is definitely one that a lot of home enthusiasts, labbers, and nonprofits and things will use. So there are alternatives
KVM,
out there.
the Linux
But
side of things, and
KVM, yep, all those types of things. Now there's a certain cost to move to it. I always worry about access to support. What are the toolings that you have? If you're using VMware, you can put in-guest agents, supportability for hardware, those types of things. It's available for competent technical support. It's certainly something new to learn. It's certainly doable, but for things that are important for running your business on, most people don't like to take chances. So the other option is to move your servers to like a public cloud like Azure. That's a fair thing to do. It's basically a metered type of subscription model that will work. Also, it's just kind of a different model. It's taking your servers here and then moving them somewhere else. It has a certain amount of things to sort out, advantages, disadvantages, but it's something to look at if you were thinking about it before, you don't want to go through these licensing changes, you can certainly take a look
And
at
if
that.
I'm gonna jump in here on two things. First, just to your last point there on the moving the servers to the cloud. There's also the option, of course, of moving services to the cloud because a lot of things that are run on some of your servers, depending on your particular business case, could just be services that are now could be fully replaced by cloud services and don't really need servers in the traditional sense. Like you might have a SQL server that can now just be a rented SQL service from Azure or something. I'm just using that as an example. But
Sure.
the other thing,
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject here and say we're, pretty close to being halfway, a little farther than halfway through. And just want to remind everybody that is watching, if you have questions, Mike is an expert in this area, so definitely take advantage of his knowledge and please chat us your questions. So please continue, Mike.
So you're absolutely right about the using SaaS models. It's like if you're a small organization and you have like a domain controller and a file server,
Yep.
and
Exactly.
you can absolutely I think a term for it is refactoring or transitioning your business to a cloud model where you use things like Teams and SharePoint to host your data, your files and such, and not just a traditional mapped
Yep.
drive. It takes some rework. Your business processes have to allow for those types of things, some training. Um, I'm old. I still like having a map drive, but I can learn. I'm working on it. So everything can be adjusted. And if you have a ERM or CRM or something along those lines, and the company that you're using only has an on-prem version, then they're probably not going to exist for the next 10 years. And maybe they already don't exist. It's probably time to take a look at something else that's cloud hosted, because then you move a lot of that infrastructure that you need for that somewhere else, and then you'll need less things on
And I
prem.
think it's that whole financial case model that we've talked ad nauseum about. Well, do you invest in the infrastructure or do you invest in a as a service model? And I mean, we can go back and forth on that 100 times. So I don't want to really dive down that hole, but I just want to make that point that in a smaller scenario and specifically in this ugly case, it may be time to take that hard look and maybe have those discussions.
Sure, and especially with the DR site, the model forever has been like buy new hardware, take your old hardware, move it to DR, and then it lives a really long time. The remote DR site can easily be replaced with cloud services. You can replicate your virtual machines to many different types of services and backups offsite. So if you have a disaster, you spin those things up in a cloud, or you download them back with bandwidth and stuff being as it is. That's a much more viable option than it used to be, 10 years ago. So another option is you can run VMware without support.
Yep.
That's always an option. vSphere 7, the end of life has extended to October 2nd of next year. So technically, we should be able to get updates and security updates, which are very important, up until about that time. And then after that, the hypervisor is going to be end of support. There'll probably be no more security updates to it. Then you're really starting to take a pretty significant risk by not keeping it up to date, not keeping up to security patches. And we'll see what ends up happening, at least for 8 and beyond, what they start doing with if they start adding like an activation or those types of things. Currently, they don't have. You put a license key in, and that's it. There's no check for it. I suspect there'll be an activation process on the VMware host at some point, but we haven't seen anything yet. So,
Gotcha. Okay, excellent. Well, that is of course always something that people will they just want to take the leap, right? Right without support.
yeah, and it's all about risk. If it's a DR site, sure, it's a home lab or a testing thing, for sure.
Sure.
That's a educated guess or educated risk at that point. But for production, if you have your kernel panic or a driver problem where you need assistance, you won't be able to get it, and that ends up getting difficult. when it takes things down.
So to kind of bring, if we were to try to wrap this up, I mean, from what I'm taking away from this, right as it sits right now, some of the things that people have to keep in mind is number one, it's now a subscription model, right? And that's going to be a key thing that you have to think of in terms of financial for up, down, up uh, for ongoing. Second thing, support. You have to plan for your support, and that both in the ugly sense, like, hey, I might not want to run with support, or B, if you are going to run with support, that you might have, you got to plan ahead a little bit, make sure that you have all your licensing in place to make sure that your support is going to continue. And that third, your existing license models will be changing. And it's just to what degree and how do you want to split? Like if you're running Essentials, if you're running Essentials Plus, it might make more sense to go to Standard if you have a smaller number of cores. Is that a fair statement, a fair way of summarizing this?
Yep, absolutely. Just keep in mind that it's a subscription, and then finding out when your renewal would have been, because that's essentially when you need to have purchased or buy the subscription by then. And then after that, it's math. Some environments have two hosts, so Essentials Plus probably doesn't make as much sense. Standard does. And it is easier to get ahead of things. Like some of the customers that I work with very closely, we were tracking down the other day, and their renewal is in July of next year. So now we can do the thought exercise to figure it out for budgeting season at the end of the year. So they're ready to go to make that subscription, make that purchase in July instead of waiting to the last minute. And hopefully, VMware Broadcom doesn't make a liar out of us and change all the stuff in a couple of weeks at their conference. But it's certainly possible. Anytime you get into subscription licensing, you cannot expect your pricing to stay the same. You cannot expect the type of licensing or the bundles to stay the same because they could go, no, we're going to add, a replacement for Enterprise Plus back in with all these other features because we have some people that want it. They can it'd be a lot more flexible with those types of things. So yeah, but yes, that's it. Just figure out when your renewal date would have been, and then understand it's a subscription, like you said, and then count your cores and do the math. It is pretty easy, even if it's unpleasant.
And I like to always say, information is power. And it's good to be prepared because the more information you have now and before your renewal date, you'll be able to make informed decisions and then, of course, make the right decisions for your organization. Well, this has gone really quick, but it's been very informative. I wanted to thank you, Mike. That's been really great. For those of you joining us, if you didn't get your questions answered, you can feel free to check us out on our website at www.netcenter.net. You can email us at info@netcenter.net, or you can check us out on any of our social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And we do go live approximately every 2 weeks on both LinkedIn and YouTube. You can follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you do subscribe to us, make sure to click the notification bell and so that you get notified when we do go live. With that, I also want to make a little plug here for for Envision, which will be coming up this fall. And the Envision is our annual conference. We'll have more information on this later, but also check out our website that we have information there. But it's going to be an exciting one this year. So that said, Mike, thanks again. Look forward to seeing you again here on NCI Live, and we'll have more topics, I'm sure, to discuss. Always great having you on, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for joining us here on NCI Live. Bye.